Coming up on Smart Tech today, Matthew Cassinelli and I are finally doing the interview we've been promising you. Yes, we talked to Jonathan Hui, who is the principal engineer at Google and the VP of technology at the Thread Group. Yes, we talk all things Thread. We get into the history of Thread, the present of Thread, the future of Thread, and everything in between, and try to answer some of those questions that clarify some of those things that you may be asking. It is a really interesting interview. And I certainly was nerding out getting to talk to Jonathan about all things Thread. Then, of course, we've got the news and we've got our picks of the week for you. So tune in and check it all out on Smart Tech Today.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This episode of Smart Tech Today is brought to you by Command Line Heroes, a podcast that tells the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who are revolutionizing the technology landscape. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts. And by Technology Powers X. Learn how technology is reshaping business through an original podcast from Dell Technologies. Search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. Hey, welcome to Smart Tech Today, the show where we explain the exciting, the dynamic, and the sometimes confusing subject that is the Internet of Things. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I am your other co-host, Matthew Cassinelli. How you doing, Mikah?
Hello, Matthew. I am doing well, although I have to say I'm missing a piece of myself today. I got into a fight with an avocado. Oh, you actually can't see it because I changed into a new kind of bandage. But I basically removed a whole piece of me with a knife as I was fighting with an avocado. It was kind of gruesome this morning.
Jeez, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Luckily, I have been looking forward to this episode of Smart Tech Today all day. So I got some hydrocolloid bandages and popped that on there, and I'm feeling good. And I'm so excited today to be talking to Jonathan Hui, who is the VP of Technology for the Thread Group, as well as a principal engineer at Google. So excited to have you here, Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So as I was kind of talking about before the show, we have been talking about Thread for quite a while and kind of talking about it in concert with P-Chip, or as I used to call it, P-Choip, because it is Project Connected Home over IP. But I've moved on. I know it's Project Chip now. And, you know, it was exciting in that way as being this means of communication between devices and sort of creating a robust network. But things really clicked for me when Apple released the HomePod Mini that had a Thread radio inside, and some HomeKit over Thread devices started to be released as well. And I was able to see the robustness and the responsiveness of Thread and what it was going to mean for devices going forward. But I think before we get into all of that fun stuff that exists now, I'm really curious, and I think that listeners might be as well, about the history of Thread. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Thread was something that was developed as part of the Nest platform, correct? So the Nest products.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, Nest was founded in 2009, 2010, and it started with the Nest thermostat. And then a couple of years later, they released the Nest Protect, which was a connected smoke alarm that allowed, different smoke alarms to communicate with each other and propagate alarms across the home. Of course, Nest had a much bigger vision than just, comfort and smoke alarms. So they really wanted to build out a solution that included a number of devices that were, some of them being low power, some of them being plugged in, and you started to see that, over the last more recent few years with the launch of our Nest security platform, as well as Nest cams and whatnot. Now, back in 2012 or so, Nest was looking for a way to build a common communication platform that would allow them to build these solutions more effectively. And they wanted, to support both Wi-Fi devices as well as very low-power devices, battery-powered devices that last for years on modest batteries. And so, the first thing they said is, what do we need this protocol to do? They looked out at existing technologies. Of course, there was Zigbee, there was Z-Wave, Bluetooth was around at that time, and all of those existing technologies were, required different protocols, completely different protocols, all the way through the application layer, which meant that if Nest wanted to go and build a Wi-Fi product and integrate it with another technology, they would have to build these translation gateways that would link the two. And Nest really wanted to avoid all of that. They wanted to build a single application layer that would communicate seamlessly across a variety of technologies, Wi-Fi, low power, cellular, other link technologies that you can imagine. And they wanted that single application layer to just, have a common security paradigm, a common commissioning and setup flow for the user, be a really consistent user experience. And so what they settled on was, let's just use IP. The Internet Protocol has been so successful in creating a common layer for the internet that we see today, to allow mobile devices, to allow laptops, desktops, to allow communication with cloud services. And so Nest was like, why can't we just use that same architecture for low power devices? And so, there wasn't an existing technology at the time that supported IP. And Nest went around talking to other product manufacturers and other, silicon manufacturers, and they were like, yeah, it would be really great if we could just have devices that communicate as just other, internet devices do today. And so that was really the formation of the Thread Group. The Thread Group was founded in 2014 as a nonprofit organization, and it really had three fundamental purposes. The first one being to develop and maintain the Thread protocol specification. Second one, to be a marketing organization that promotes the use of Thread. And then third, to really provide a robust certification program to help ensure that products that are Thread enabled provide a consistent and robust user experience. And so, Thread Group, as you said, is actually, many years now, 2014, so 7 years in the making. And, with Project Chip and HomeKit, you're really starting to see that technology take off.
So, yeah, I think one of the things that gets a little confusing from the outside, because you've had a lot of people who speaking of Thread today as it is now, a lot of people talking about their smart home devices and wondering, so when am I going to get a firmware update that enables Thread? And so there's some misunderstanding about how Thread kind of fits into this space, that it's not just a software thing, that there is hardware involved. So I was hoping you could kind of explain for folks why there needs to be a chip specifically in a device that has Thread support, and how it's different from Zigbee, how it's different from Z-Wave, how it's different from straight up Wi-Fi, how it's different from Bluetooth. What is it that makes Thread need more than just a firmware update? Although, as we've noted, we talked to Tim Booth of Eve about Eve's devices, and they just had some foresight about things, and so there was already a chip in some of their newer products, so a firmware update worked. But for some, it's going to require a whole new design for those devices. So where does Thread fit into that, and why is it that the HomePod Mini has a Thread radio in it?
Yeah, so Thread is a network link technology. You could think of it as, the way I like to say is, it's a low-power alternative to Wi-Fi. We say alternative because we don't see Thread as in any way competitive to Wi-Fi. We really do see it as an extension. Again, it's IP, so we're trying to extend existing network infrastructure, not replace it. So Thread, if you look at a typical link technology stack, at the base layer is what we call the physical layer. And the physical layer is implemented in silicon with an actual radio. Thread chose to use a radio physical layer defined by the IEEE, and that standard is called 802.15.4. So if you're familiar with Wi-Fi, that's IEEE 802.11. And so Thread has 802.15.4, which is different from 802.11. And a little bit of background there, 802.15.4 was actually defined way back in 2001 initially for low-power, low-cost applications. And in about, I think, 2002, 2003, that was really the basis of Zigbee. So Zigbee, as we know it today, uses that same exact radio that Thread chose. And that's not just a coincidence. Thread purposely chose an existing radio that's widely used today to take advantage of economies of scale as well as time to market, right? We wanted to, we know cost is often driven by, scale and how many chips are shipped globally, as well as, the kind of applications and products that we're trying to address with Thread are in very much the same space as Zigbee is today. And so we really did want to enable existing hardware designs that support Zigbee to be able to upgrade or leverage Thread without any hardware change.
Okay, yeah. See, so that makes sense, I think, for folks who have been a little bit confused about that in the past. And I guess then that makes sense why Zigbee plays such a large role in Project Connected Home over IP, right? Because that protocol or that system seemed to be the one that was worth going, focusing on, right?
That's right. Yeah, Thread actually has quite a bit of heritage from Zigbee. You'll see a lot of the players that are contributing to the Thread group effort are also members of the Zigbee Alliance. So there is actually a lot of working together between the Zigbee Alliance and Thread group, and the Thread group actually has a liaison agreement established with the Zigbee Alliance, and that was prior to Project Chip. Now with the advent of Project Chip, I think that that was really partly a genesis within the Zigbee Alliance, in that Zigbee for quite some time, I think even all the way back to 2008, 2009, Zigbee has been trying to address what an application layer might look like if it's working on top of IP. And so there was an initial effort within Zigbee called Zigbee IP that was in 2010, and then more recently, there was an initiative within Zigbee called Dot, which was also attempting to do an application layer over IP. And then Project Chip is the most recent, but I think has gained by far the most traction. And I think in large part because of Thread's availability. That Thread really does provide a robust answer to how we do IP over low-power devices.
I have a clarification just on what we were asking about earlier. Does that mean that Zigbee devices, you can expect that they could get the firmware upgrade and not have to, you basically don't have to replace those? Or is that also just going to depend on the product and manufacturer?
It does depend on the product and manufacturer. There's a lot of considerations involved. So mechanically, there's considerations of just upgrading. Like in theory, you could just software upgrade it, but then there's questions of does the platform have the memory and resources to do the software update to Thread plus whatever application layer is running on top, including Project Chip. And then there's other considerations of just migrating users, right? There's a lot of complexities involved with upgrading devices, and so I think you'll see some manufacturers take that step, and other manufacturers be more conservative in how they approach rolling out chip over Thread devices.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you. So right now, I think we will move from the history to the now, and one of the things that I, as a consumer outside of the developer space, well, I sort of dip my toe into the developer space a little bit, but for the sake of the conversation, consumer space, it seems that the only way I can use Thread devices right now is via Apple's kind of HomeKit HomeKit over Thread system, where I've got the HomePod Mini and eventually the Apple TV that has a Thread router or the Thread radio in it that allows me to then connect some devices that I have, Nanoleaf essential bulbs, and I'm trying to remember now what all I have. Oh, a bunch of Eve stuff and a few other things. And all of those are Thread enabled. But I also have an Eero router that has a Thread radio in it, and I can go into the router app, I can tap the plus button, I can choose, add a Thread device, and then it asks me to scan a QR code. But as it stands, I have not come across a product that I could actually connect using that method. It's all just HomeKit stuff that seems to be supporting Thread right now. So my question is, how far away are we from something that's more platform agnostic, something that's less kind of tied to HomeKit, for example, or some other means, for me to just, if I've got something that has a Thread radio, I can, and I know it ends up being, a border router or what have you. How far away are we from being able to, if I did buy the Nanoleaf bulb, but I don't have a HomePod Mini, but I do have the Eero router, I can't currently, as far as I know, connect those bulbs to my Eero router that has Thread inside. Are we close to that yet? What is the holdup, if you do know?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And just to be, complete that statement, Google has been shipping Thread-based devices since 2017 as well. But just like HomeKit, Google's currently their Thread devices are not interoperable with devices from other manufacturers. So what you observe with HomeKit is the same with Google and its Thread devices as well. I think what you're seeing right now is, Thread is a new technology, and we really are trying to be thoughtful in how we deploy that technology to consumers. Wi-Fi has the benefit of being around for a couple decades now, and users are comfortable with managing their Wi-Fi network, at least to the point of knowing that there is this notion of Wi-Fi, that Wi-Fi has this shared secret that you need to remember if you want to add new devices to it. And users just deal with it today because they've had to, and they've learned to do that. I think Thread has, having the benefit of coming around only in the last few years, we're trying to make that process a lot simpler and more seamless for the user, to the point that the user doesn't even know that they're deploying Thread in their home. So this is true for the Nest products as well as the HomeKit products. When you're setting up let's just say a HomeKit device, unless you're digging deep or understand the technology, you really don't know whether it's using Thread. And that's not just a coincidence. That's on purpose. And so what's really happening is these devices are all compatible from a protocol perspective. But what's happening is the network credentials, or the shared secret, if you will, that's used to set up that Thread network, is not yet exposed in any way that allows other manufacturers to join their devices to it. And so it's really just a question of what's the most effective way of sharing those network credentials across the different ecosystems. And I guess to back up a little bit, with Wi-Fi, one of the challenges of having a secure Wi-Fi network, in combination with having the user manage that passphrase, is that often you get what is technically secure, but actually the user created an insecure network because they set the passphrase to password or admin, right? And that's part of the reason why we're trying to develop ecosystems and usage of Thread technology in a way that we take the user out of the loop in making these mistakes, right? We don't expect the user to have the means to know how to make sure everything is secure, and so we want to make sure we do that for the user. And so part of the challenge has been what we do with this network credential. And so right now the solutions today are generating a completely random value. Obviously, given that it's random, it's not something that's easily written down on paper or easy to type in on a keyboard. So the last thing we want to do is ask the user to, when they're adding a new device, is, hey, can you go and type this random long value into your iPhone, right?
Right.
So as part of Project Chip, we are working through the Alliance to ensure that the ecosystems can agree on a way to share those network credentials and really make the usage of Thread really seamless. And so that's where we are today, and hopefully within the next several months or so, you'll start to see developments with having those Thread networks be able to work across different ecosystems.
Is there anything that you can talk about for the process that manufacturers go through in order to receive Thread certification? So I'll preface this by talking about, in the past, I've talked, there's some stuff that's made available to the public, some stuff that's not. But in order to go to market with the Works with Apple HomeKit badge, there are certain requirements that a manufacturer has to meet. And some of those are made available so that we kind of know what is required, and you've got to get approval. And it used to be that you had to have a hardware thing, but now they allow it through software. And I'm kind of simplifying it a little bit, but I'm curious because I recently picked up Belkin's Waymo brand, this new HomeKit controller, and right now it's Bluetooth LE. So I hate to say it, but it's garbage right now. But it also has a Thread radio built in, and I'm very excited for that to get activated. At which point it will no longer be garbage. And when that happens, then that's going to be great. But Waymo or Belkin itself had talked about, we're going through the process of certification. Is the certification process a strictly security-based process? Is it also a usability process? Are you kind of paying attention to, we want to make this seamless for the user at the end? If you can tell us anything about that, how does that part work?
Yeah, so the Thread group manages the certification process for Thread. And again, Thread is in many ways analogous to the Wi-Fi Alliance. And so for those that are familiar with Wi-Fi certification, Thread certification is in large part modeled off of that, which means that it's really testing the conformance and interoperability of the networking protocol that's implemented in the device. So it's not necessarily testing anything about usability, right? We're not doing anything. We don't have any requirements for UI or user experience or any of that. And also, Thread Group also does not have any strict requirements on hardware. Certain hardware capabilities are required depending on the kind of security level you're trying to achieve. But Thread Group is not validating that your hardware, for example, is a NIST certified component or anything like that. What it does do is validate that the bits and bytes that are being transmitted over the 15.4 radio are done in a way that's conformant to the Thread protocol specification and in a way that's compatible and interoperable with an existing set of devices. And so the Thread Group's certification process involves what we call a test harness. The test harness includes a number of devices that what we call system implementations of Thread. And we take a device under test that's coming in, and we basically do a bunch of tests to make sure that that device can attach to the Thread network, can communicate effectively. You can ping the device and send IPv6 packets. just to make sure that the communications are working as expected. Now, to perform certification, you do have to be a member of the thread group. The thread group has a tier of membership called the implementer tier, which is the lowest level that allows a member company to start certifying their products. And you basically submit your device to a test lab, and those test labs will run the device through the tests and provide the results. And assuming they all pass, you can submit those to the thread group to achieve your certification. Now, I will say that there is a whole supply chain process in this. For example, a product developer may choose an existing software development kit from, we have a number of silicon manufacturers like NXP, Silicon Labs, Nordic Semiconductor as well, and others, where they provide a pre-certified software development kit that includes both a module or a chip and the software itself. And that is intended to make it much easier for product makers to just integrate that into their technology so that they can ship more quickly. And Thread Group does have a cert program or a cert process called certification by inheritance, which allows you to take advantage of existing certifications of a module and include that in your design.
Matthew, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up of, I think I was double-checking on some of the research, and it's true that Thread is specifically for that low-power type of device, right? And not security cameras or things like that. Is that, and then I guess if that is true, is that why the sort of like built-on Thread logo isn't going to be as much a consumer-facing, or maybe it'll be on the back, but not necessarily like HomeKit in the same way? I think I've just to clarify, because I've been thinking a little bit too much, I think, of Thread as the equivalent of chip, but it's really part of that process and not the entire thing, which makes sense, but just for my own.
Yeah. In many ways, Thread is an ingredient technology. Right? Thread in itself doesn't provide a complete solution. Again, in many of the same ways that Wi-Fi doesn't provide a complete solution. So today you'll see, depending on the product and the product developer view of how they want to market their devices, even though they are Wi-Fi certified, they may not choose to put the Wi-Fi logo on their box just because that's not important to how they market the device. And I think what you see with Thread that could be something similar. Where Nanoleaf and Eve, for example, they proudly put the built-on Thread logo on their products. But for example, when you look at Apple's devices, the built-on Thread logo, like they put Thread in the tech specs, but when you purchase the product, you don't see the built-on Thread logo. But that's the same with the you don't see the Wi-Fi logo on their boxes as well. So I think it really just depends on how the companies choose to market their products.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for myself, it's almost as in a consumer purchasing decision. If it doesn't have that doesn't mean like, oh, it's missing it. It just might not even be built on that same technology, versus it being present is you're like, oh, it definitely will have that extended range and interoperability. So I think it's not necessarily like a universal thing, but just I don't want it to be like we don't recommend something because it doesn't have Thread when it really just isn't designed for that.
Sure.
So that's all.
Yeah.
Cool. A simple question that might have a very complex answer here. So Eve is an example company. One of the things that I've always liked about Eve is that it makes a lot of products that all kind of work together and are all products. You think of getting one, the motion sensor, for example, and then the door and window contact sensor makes sense. And then you add maybe the Eve Aqua, which is their sort of faucet system, and on and on and on and on. As Bluetooth LE devices, however, some of those, particularly the ones that are needing to be more instant, like the contact sensor, they just did not have the responsiveness, and they also have a little button, and the responsiveness was never there. Can you explain what makes Thread so much more responsive than Bluetooth LE? Why is it that this technology works so well for low power devices that particularly, that you want to communicate quickly amongst themselves and with kind of your whole network?
Yeah, I think the main difference between Bluetooth LE and Thread is really that they were originally designed for completely different applications. Bluetooth LE was, in very much originally a wire replacement, where I wanted to make wireless headsets, I wanted to make wireless keyboards, wireless mouse, and so if you think about those as a wire replacement, for those that are more knowledgeable about the technology of how Bluetooth LE works, is they have this notion of connections. Within a connection, you establish the kind of constant data rate that you expect to provide, and it really is more designed for those kind of applications. Whereas Thread from the get-go was designed to support very low power devices, but at the same time very responsive, but also what we call asynchronous communication, in that you really have no idea when a device is going to need to communicate something. Right? You can't predict when the door is going to open and you need to send a message to say, hey, the door opened, or that the fire alarm is going to go off and now I need to communicate that alarm. So Bluetooth, for example, there's a lot of overhead in establishing that connection, but it was okay, right? You go and you pair that Bluetooth device, and it's okay to spend a few seconds, but once it's on, then you go about your work. So with Bluetooth, you have to advertise, and the other side has to start scanning. Once they discover each other, then that connection has to get established, and they need to start. They have to negotiate some parameters of how often I want to communicate. So there's quite a bit of overhead there, and the other thing with Bluetooth is that in many chipsets that we see deployed today, there is a limit to the number of connections that you can have established, and so in many of the products, that's typically a single-digit number, like 6 or 7. So, for devices that are solutions that are using Bluetooth for things like door and window sensors, they just it's not feasible for them to maintain a connection at all times because of those connection limits. Whereas in Thread, it really is it's a connectionless protocol in much the same way that IP itself is. It's just responsible for transmitting datagrams or a single message at a time, right? So in Thread, when a device needs to send a message, it can just wake up and spit that packet out and go back to sleep, and it doesn't have to maintain a constant connection with any of the neighboring devices at all times to do that. So that's in large part why the latency is the way it is. So just to give a little more background, the way Thread works is that you have this notion of a routed mesh, or the set of routers that are within the mesh are always listening. So their receivers are always on, waiting for packets to arrive. And then you have this notion of sleepy end device, which are battery powered. And at any time, the sleepy end device can just choose to wake up and send a packet. But it doesn't have to do it on a certain data rate or a certain schedule. It can just say, I'm going to wake up whenever the next time the door opens. And so that's the big difference between Bluetooth and Thread, because on Thread, the device is allowed to sleep when it's not doing anything, whereas and when it does need to do something, it just can quickly wake up, send a single packet, and go back to sleep.
That was incredibly helpful. Thank you for explaining that. I think our last question for you is about now the future of Thread. Based on your best estimate, how far out are we from seeing kind of a flood of Thread devices, Thread devices, because of course Google has been using Thread for quite a long time, but certainly these more marketed as being run over Thread. Is this something that we're going to see throughout this year, or is it more a 2022 thing where suddenly many of the smart devices that we know of are taking advantage of Thread and the surrounding technologies?
Yeah, certainly. So I think you're, like, as with anything that's technology adoption, there's these step changes in the growth of the adoption. So Nest was the first one to adopt Thread technology and deploy it widely. Of course, we were the only company doing it at the time. More recently, Apple has picked up on it, so that's the next step change. And you're starting to see Eve and Nanoleaf, and now Waymo, and I'm sure you'll see more coming through that ecosystem. And then with Project Chip, I think that's where the next step change is going to happen. In that really does open the door, not just at the Thread layer, but also at the application layer, to allow any ecosystem and any product developer to take advantage of this technology. So that, as you know, there's the big three, Amazon, Apple, and Google, are all part of that. But more importantly, there's, I think 150 or 200 other member companies that are involved in that effort. So I think you should see, or I hope to see, a lot of increased deployment and adoption of Thread. The other thing that I'd also mention is, I know here we're talking mainly about consumer and smart home devices, but Thread, being an IP-based protocol, is also applicable to enterprise and commercial markets. And so this year, recently, the Thread group also has joined an alliance called IP Bliss, which is for building and lighting, IP for building and lighting solutions. And we're working together with building applications like KNX and Dolly and others, which aren't familiar to smart home, but you can imagine the scale that's involved if we're talking about outfitting whole commercial buildings with smart sensors based on Thread. So I think there's also another piece of this that you'll start to see a lot of adoption with Thread that may be kind of invisible to the general consumer.
Awesome. Well, I am certainly looking forward to Thread continuing to permeate the ecosystem, and happy with the responsiveness of Thread so far. Jonathan Hui, I want to thank you so much for taking some time today to talk to Matthew and me. We do appreciate it, and all of our listeners and viewers out there, I'm sure, who have learned so much more about Thread, and we'll be keeping an eye on things as they continue to go, and maybe we'll have you back on in the future at some point if you feel like it. So thank you.
Of course. No, it was a pleasure to be here, and always happy to talk about Thread.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks again so much to Jonathan Hui for joining us. Let's take a quick break before we hit the news. This episode of Smart Tech Today is brought to you by, God, I love them, Command Line Heroes. Command Line Heroes is a podcast that shares with you the epic, true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who have, and frankly still are, revolutionizing the technology landscape. And Season 7 is out now. Folks, Season 7 of Command Line Heroes explores a pivotal year, The year was 1995. It was the start of the dot-com boom, but a lot of things had to come together for the internet to succeed. Meet the internet class of 95. This was an incredible year that, frankly, before Command Line Heroes came along to tell me about it, I didn't realize was such an incredible year, such a pivotal year. And just for folks who are not watching, you have got to check out the incredible graphics. The Command Line Heroes, they make every single time they release a new season. They have these beautiful graphics to accompany the shows that the different episodes that they're covering. And I just think it's incredible. The last series, they had these kind of like action figures for each of the people. And this time everything's done up in like Windows 95 look and feel. It's really cool. So let's talk about some of the awesome stuff from the internet class of 95. Long before you could hop on GoDaddy to grab a domain, there was a woman you'd have to call. Elizabeth Jake Feinler was the keeper of all domains. Episode 1 of the season features a conversation with the woman herself, now in her 90s, about how she managed the internet and how her team needed to create the DNS. Web design took a while to become a career, but it got a big boost in 1995. When the Batman Forever website launched to promote the movie, it showed people what was possible on the web. This episode features pioneers like Jeffrey Zeldman, the godfather of web design, who recount the shift that forever changed the face of the web. So 1995 was an absolute pivot point, the moment when the internet went from academic curiosity to global phenomena. Command Line Heroes is hosted by developer and podcaster Sargent Barak. And of course, as is the way with this, we always get to have a sneak peek of the season. And this one is really, it's so interesting, kind of building out, if I can use this pun, a web of the picture that formed the web as it is today, that has formed the internet as it is today, and getting to know the individuals who are a part of it. It's really interesting, but I just, every single part of Command Line Heroes, it's just all so perfectly put together to provide this package. Yes, listen to all those P's that come together to make such a great show. Check out all of the incredible stories from Season 7 today. All you have to do is search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts. That's Command Line Heroes. Download it today. And of course, our thanks to Command Line Heroes for their support. I was jazzed to see recently one of our listeners was saying, I downloaded an episode of Command Line Heroes for my kids and was playing it, and now they listen to all of the episodes. So new episode comes down, they get to learn about the way that the web was built. Back in my day, you had to listen to a modem make noises at you before you could connect to the internet. Very good stuff. You should check out Command Line Heroes. And thanks, of course, for sponsoring our show. We appreciate it. Why don't you take the lead on the news today? Tell us what we're kicking off with today.
Sure. I saw this review come in from CNET on the Polk React soundbar, and I thought it was interesting because the article specifically references the idea of, do we really need a speaker that's also an assistant, like a soundbar specifically? I think just because we had talked about this in the past. So
is this an attack?
I also realized that as I put it in, I was like, I don't think it's necessarily an attack, but I just thought it was interesting that they had taken that particular angle. And I do think that they didn't seem super satisfied, but it also wasn't the greatest reason, where they were just talking about how the audio grinds to a halt when you try to use it. And I wasn't really sure, though, like, isn't that the same of every smart speaker, that it just like dims the audio that's playing currently? I think maybe it was like more questioning the value of only having a soundbar as your thing, because then you do have to interrupt the TV every time, as opposed to if you went into the other room and like asked just the little speaker, it's not like interrupting the audio. I don't think I had ever really known much about the Polk brand until in college, when I did like a marketing course thing, and that they were sponsoring one of the other teams and stuff like that. So I just thought it was an interesting it's a nice quality soundbar too, and it's got the smart speaker stuff built in. So it's kind of an interesting experience. Wow, I don't think I actually noticed the photo of the remote, which looks truly awful. It's just labels and buttons. It's down like halfway through the article. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Now I need to see this remote. What an interesting contraption. Let's see how to describe this to the listeners. At the top is the ALEXA button, which is a raised dome. Below that, you have a raised bar. On the left is TV and on the right is Bluetooth. But instead of just doing two separate buttons, the whole bar is just raised. In the middle of the controller, both vertically and horizontally, vertically it's just above middle, but is the volume up and down button, and it is pressed in to the device.
Yeah, divots.
For some reason, they gave bass and voice their own separate controls next to volume. They're on the left and the right, and they are neither raised nor divoted. They are just on the same level surface as the controller face. Below the volume button is a divoted mute button. Below that, on the left, is night and sport, and on the right is music and movie. Those are also undivoted / not raised. And then below that are the controls for the surround sound system, which seem to have some sort of engraved round rect surrounding the controls. Inside there is volume and balance, and minus and plus for volume and L and R for balance are both divoted. So there are just buttons all over the place, like in every axis that you could possibly.
Yeah, it's just like either dips or weird lumps.
Yeah,
most of it isn't even
call them
applicable.
Buttons, can you?
Yeah, so
a very
I'm not totally
odd
sure,
remote.
But I think it's just.
I think they really want you to use your voice to control this thing. If you give somebody a bad enough remote, then they'll just use their voice.
So our second story is a cool new feature for Lenovo laptops that's called ALEXA Show Mode, which is the ability to have your laptop, basically when you're not using it, have a full screen voice assistant experience on the device, which is pretty amazing.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's
I think
really cool.
This makes so much sense, especially because half the time you just have the thing sitting there. I mean, now that I'm thinking, I was just like, man, I wish my iPad has this, which it does. It's called the Hey Lady trigger phrase that it can normally use. But I think having the full...
But it's not like a hub.
Yeah. That's fair. It's the show.
I'm literally looking at a dark iPad right now that's almost always plugged in because it's the one I use with my for iOS Today and other stuff. And it's a dark screen right now. It would be so cool if I could just have that on and have it as a hub. Remember that in the beginning when the iPad launched, Apple specifically forbade, right? That's the past tense. Yeah. Forbade sort of desktop style or dashboard style apps for the iPad. And I don't know why that was the case, but to this day, those are still, they're not banned per se, but they are kind of a little taboo. So if you find them, they're kind of junk apps for the most part. And it would be really nice to have some ambient hubbage, some ambient hubbage going on with this iPad that's just hanging out here.
Yeah, exactly. So once again, as iPad users, we're jealous of people with better smart display stuff than us, but that's okay because I think this makes a lot of sense. It does sound like this is sort of one of those exclusive for now features that maybe would come to other products in the future, and it probably does require a certain type of laptop that can handle or like wake from sleep and do that kind of stuff while it's idle, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, the screen's just going to be sitting there anyway. So yeah, turn it into a smart display. I feel like smart displays overall are like the big thing that we need to get further into, especially, I mean, I have no idea related to Thread or something like that, but just if those things could have that like real-time data a lot more than something that was slightly out of date or it's constantly trying to get up to date. So that's cool. I would love to see more of that in the future. Yeah.
I've been thinking about doing that. Some folks have built their own. And I have to say Echo Show I have in my kitchen, I regularly look at that for information, time, weather, news. The recipe recommendations are never very good. But outside of that, I do like the stuff that it displays. So yeah, I would love to have one, except I want one that's more personalized. You know, I could have my calendar on it, and have information related to, well, basically just stuff that I would want there. And then control over whether it cycles through things or just shows what I'm looking for. Remember those people used to fawn over those big displays they would set up especially in startups, like app download.
Oh yeah, my brother worked at a company like that ran
how many
that
views
software.
Are currently. Yeah,
exactly. I think it's still a thing. My brother worked in a company that ran the technology that did some of that, but it was for like giant brands and stuff like that. I'd still have a dashboard for my work. Like, I think it makes a lot of sense. I used to actually design it for the social media analytics that we did. We'd like pump in our data into our database, and so I was designing the like data visualizations. And I always thought that kind of thing, just having that, I mean, it's the same thing with the Apple Watch rings and any type of information like that, is just you change what you measure, sort of. There's like a industry phrase that's smoother than that. But I think if you had that information up there, if you know what your power level is of all your electronics, you might like turn some stuff off more, as opposed to just not ever think about it. So I think all that stuff makes sense. And I put a link in our Slack, and I'll put it in the Discord too. But just the smart home Kindle display thing that I linked to a couple of weeks ago. That's just like the guy set up his Kindle and then printed just a fake frame around it so that it looked like one, and then put all of the information on there. So
Captain Jack posted in the Discord chat a video from a YouTube account, I guess is the best way to put it, called Wicked Makers. And Wicked Makers made a DIY smart mirror with a Raspberry Pi as the connection. It looks like they bought the Canna kit, and it lets you make a mirror that has, you know, whatever you kind of want to build into it. So a nice way to repurpose an old display if you want to. And the whole walkthrough is there. It's about a 15-minute video. Of course, it takes longer than 15 minutes, but you know, it's sped up. But at the end, you get what looks kind of like an Android system built into the device. And so it's got a big wallpaper in the middle, and then there's your weather and the temperature, and it even has controls for music, which I'm wondering if it's a touch screen or if it's just something else. So anyway, that looks actually quite good and makes me want to build one. I've got a television that's not being used for anything right now. It would be kind of cool. Captain Jack says not to touch. So it just displays with the. Oh, yeah. I see. It's got the Google Assistant or Alexa built in to control. So once again, as a control freak, not big on having to use my voice to control stuff.
We got to cure you that one day. For running a smart home show, the fact that you don't use your voice is pretty weird.
I use my voice I get paid to use my voice. I don't want to use my voice in my personal life. This golden thing costs money. Okay, I'll stop.
You're like,
that's terrible.
Can you turn on the radio? Using your.
Oh my Lord.
I mean, it was totally something that I had to like train myself to use, and I think I got really good at it with the Apple Watch because it was just on me, and I could do all of the little things and not be like shouting in its ear.
Train myself for that. If it doesn't come easy enough for me to just think to want to do it, then why take the time to train myself to do it? I think this is where I'm just doing. So go ahead.
I'm just being dramatic of like, if you only ever did things because it didn't take training. I don't know. I mean,
that's true. That's true. But it's about reward. And the reward of this is it's not currently enough for me. There's no convenience.
My job was going to be shortcuts, so I was like, I should probably learn how to use Siri stuff more. So
right,
it does help when it pays the bills.
All right, let us move on to talk about one of my favorite thermostats. Well, actually, probably my favorite smart thermostat, which is the Ecobee Smart Thermostat. There is a 9to5 Google article that talks about it being a good thermostat to work with the Google Assistant, which is interesting because the more modern Ecobee smart thermostats actually have ALEXA built into them. And so you can use the device itself to communicate with ALEXA. And then Ecobee also makes some switches, some in-wall switches that are also ALEXA communication points. I've got a few of those, but I have ALEXA turned off because, again, voice. But the idea of using it with the Google Assistant is interesting, especially as you note, given that it's over on the Android side of things. Nest would be the first one you'd think of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I thought this was just a good angle because I would almost by default recommend a Nest as anybody using Google Home just because it's already going to be built in. But I like this that kind of approaches that angle. And I do think it's too easy for us on the show to highlight when a particular product has like something like HomeKit where it normally wouldn't, versus the default assumption just that it will work with Google Assistant or Amazon's system. So I think that's why, and especially with a product like this, that you think of the ALEXA integration ahead of time. Maybe you wouldn't even consider that this would work in your Google Home. So I thought this was just a good article to check out in the show notes. I mean, they do talk about their whole electronic system was a giant mess. So depending on your house, it could either take just a couple of minutes or it'd be a giant like home improvement project where you need a professional. So that is always worth checking out ahead of time. I'm still very interested in this. I'm like, maybe we're right in the zone where it's starting to get warm again, so maybe I'll have to invest in it. But I just remembered also, I only have a heater, so if you don't have the AC, that doesn't exactly do a whole lot. So maybe this will be a fall purchase for me, but worth checking out the review in the show notes.
That reminds me, for all the folks out there who have been so concerned and have asked, I finally did call in the folks to fix my AC. They came and they fixed it, and I had AC for about 3 hours, and then it stopped again. But by that time, it was too late for them. They were no longer, here at the office to fix it. So they came the next day and tried again. Couldn't even get the thing to turn on. It turns out these AC units are like 12 years old or something, and maybe even older. And so until next week, they're going to have somebody come next week to look at it and probably completely replace the unit. So yeah, that was an interesting thing. But basically, because the reason why it took me so long is because I had to take out my Ecobee thermostat and put back in the one that came with the house. And so I, swapped that in there, because otherwise they would immediately go, oh, well, I know why it's not working, because something is wired incorrectly. I'm like, I'm not giving them any excuses. I know that it's not this. I know that it's not that. And so immediately they were in my house for like half a second. And then they're like, well, it's probably something with the compressor. And immediately went outside and checked, or the condenser, or whatever it is, immediately went outside, and that's what it was. And I was like, I'm not giving them any chance to say that it's one of these things that I know it is not. I replace my air filters religiously, and am very careful about, wiring things. So don't even try it. So they didn't even try it. And it did end up being something wrong with the thing. So yeah, that'll be fixed hopefully soon. And then I can swap back in my good thermostat instead of the one that's there now, which is falling.
Isn't that
I had to resolder the thing. It was falling apart. That's how old it is. It was at one point it was white. It is now yellowed plastic. One of the battery connectors, the battery before I ever moved in leaked and ruined it. So I had to completely resolder the thing just so it would work. It was a mess. But what were you saying? Isn't that the best?
Oh, just when you actually get the service professional who you're like, trust me, and they're like, cool, and then they're just like, here's what it is, and you're done. And it's like, I mean, that's why you pay them really well for it. But I wish it was
beautiful,
easier. Yeah,
I wish it worked like that every time. Absolutely.
I was going to say, I'm sure your landlord is like, oh, great, now I get to spend $10,000 for replacing the HVAC system or something like that too. That's one of the times where it's good that you're renting because you don't have to pay for that.
Yes. All righty. Let's see. What's next? So, in more interesting kind of ongoing sagas of nonsense, YouTube TV has been removed from Roku's streaming devices, which Roku is a huge player in the space. So it's kind of odd to see YouTube TV being taken from those platforms, right?
Yeah. And this is like major corporations taking their toys and going home. It's very interesting. And it's like, I don't know. Part of it is we're almost like doing their work by talking about it in the way that they've chosen to communicate publicly, where YouTube has like a blog post that's like, Roku is not acting in good faith in this process. So it's like very like, let's air out our dirty laundry on our website, where it's like Roku wants to get around. I mean, I don't want to also just literally use the talking points straight from the company, because that's why they're saying, YouTube is saying that Roku is trying to get around their experiences, and then Roku is like, no, we need to renegotiate. But in the process, they've just completely removed the app, and it means that nobody else can get it. If you do already have the app, you can still use it, but it's basically like, well, if you're not going to play nice, we're not going to play nice either, and everybody loses in the process.
You're not invited to my birthday party.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we'll see something happen from this eventually, and one of them will probably give. But I mean, it sounds like Roku is not playing nice a little bit, but also Google has the upper hand there. So it's always they're like, we have never, as they had alleged, like try to access their data or interfere with Roku search results because of this. So it is very like messy, and everybody's bruised in the process. But it'll be interesting to see this come back, just because streaming services and that proliferation have been around for so long, and it just not being up on one of the major platforms that Roku really is a major platform for. It's kind of like the other guy in some ways, but that doesn't, I don't know, it's still just doing its job well, and that's just as good. So I hope we get this resolved soon, so the people don't just lose out, because it's always lame.
Yeah. The next piece here is about Withings Smart Scale. I have an old school Withings Smart Scale that it sends a low level electric current through your body, and in doing so, it's meant to be able to read individual measurements. So it's supposed to be able to read your bone mass, your muscle mass, the current water content of your body, as well as just your overall weight using the actual scale itself. And then all of those things are meant to come together to give you some information. But the Withings Smart Scale, the more recent one, has a new cardiovascular measurement that can go along with it. And it's supposed to be able to give you an assessment of your arterial health. It's calling it vascular age. And it uses that kind of to determine how healthy your heart is, how healthy your whole cardiovascular system is. I've never found it incredibly accurate in determining all of the different types of things: body fat, body water, body bone, and then everything else. But it says it uses pulse wave velocity, which can measure arterial stiffness. It tracks weight variations, which happen as the heart beats, and then combines that with changes in the body's electrical current when the blood flow reaches the feet. By comparing the time difference between blood section by the heart and its arrival at the feet, it can calculate pulse wave velocity. That figure is then contrasted with what would be normal for others in the same age bracket. Withings has been measuring PWV since 2016. 2016. And now the company says it has more than 80 million readings organized by age and other physical characteristics. So using that, it can give you an indication of your own PWV. So a really fascinating thing if it works properly.
Fair. Yeah, and this is their higher end scale too. So they have the body plus, and body cardio, and it's like 60, 100, and 150 for the one that does all this. So that makes sense. It's like, I'm glad that even just the basic thing has gone down in price over time. I had one that I think it became a Nokia product and then back again, like Nokia's entire acquisition and then downfall happened while I still was just weighing myself with this thing, which was like their app. I remember had a bunch of issues for a while, but ultimately it's just doing pretty simple stuff. But these smarter versions that's pretty cool. I think heart rate variability was another one that after just kind of looking at it and recognizing some of what it meant, it was like, oh yeah, you're right, I am out of shape. Like, like I can't really argue with that data as much as like, oh, I walk enough or I like beat my goals or whatever. Just like, no, your heart literally can't take it in some ways. And so that can, just having that awareness on a daily basis while you're standing there weighing yourself can be a really good way to improve your health. So just by making minor decisions rather than giant drastic changes. So cool product. I think that it is, I don't have one of the fancier ones too. So that part about it, like sending the electrical waves through your feet, I was like, does mine do that? Like, I didn't know it was doing that to me, but that makes sense. I guess you can't wear your socks.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. It's enough to push through socks. At least that's been my experience. But you know, if you want to make sure that you're getting the precisely accurate measurement, then they probably tell you to take off your socks. But with the one I have, I wear my socks whenever I use it, and it seems to be okay. So let's take a quick break so I can tell you about a very awesome podcast you should also check out. It's called Technology Powers X, and it is bringing you today's episode of Smart Tech Today. This is an original podcast by Dell Technologies. Each episode of Technology Powers X focuses on a different industry and goes behind the scenes to help you understand how technology is reshaping business everywhere. I got a sneak preview of Technology Powers X. In fact, all of us here at Twit did. And there are some really interesting episodes this time around, including one about the human brain. So you know me, I like to talk about sleep, and I love to talk about different ways that the brain interacts with the rest of the body. But what about how the brain can help us better understand and better create artificial intelligence? Yes, it turns out if you study the architecture of the human brain and understand how neurons communicate with one another in this organic system, then it's quite possible that we could use that information to make an AI that is more like the actual human brain. And in doing so, we can learn a lot and potentially create even better AI models. Another episode explores the world of professional esports. So if esports are your thing, then you should check this one out because it features a behind-the-scene look at Team Liquid. Then there's also an episode talking about vertical farming. I was just talking about vertical farming the other day because, you know, we only have so much space to spread out. But vertical farming, which is essentially you go up with your farms, and then even if you don't have the room to spread out, you've got more room going up. And that will help us sustainably feed 21st century populations. Technology Powers X is hosted by Danielle Applestone, a hardware engineer and entrepreneur. And by the way, if you're a pet lover like I am, you should check out episode 14, The Best Partner for Pets. Here is a quick clip.
Yet today, technology plays a growing role, not just in happy reunions, but as an invaluable tool to America's animal welfare workers.
Yes. So you should definitely check out that episode if you are a pet person. Search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. That's Technology Powers X. Download it today. And of course, our thanks to Technology Powers X for their support of Smart Tech Today and of course the whole Twit network and for creating some really interesting episodes. Actually, I wonder if this is the story that I think it is. Matthew, go ahead and talk about this story, and then we'll see if this is the same one.
Sure.
Yes. Okay, sorry. No, this is the one.
Yeah, no.
So we'll get into the story, but I just have to say that one of the nurses involved in this story is actually one of my good friends from high school. I did not know there was an Apple Watch involved in this. So tell us about this story.
It's basically... It is kind of interesting that there's a woman who was on a flight to Hawaii, and one of the details is that just kind of skim over is that she didn't know she was pregnant before she went into labor, which does actually happen. But basically, that's why she was like on a flight and didn't realize that she should expect to have to deliver her baby. And so there was a doctor and nurses on board who helped deliver it. But in the process, they basically didn't have the normal medical equipment that they should. And so somebody used their Apple Watch to measure the heart rate of the baby. Especially, it was born at 29 weeks instead of 40, so that's very, very early. But yeah, they like microwaved bottles and then kept track of his heart rate using a little Apple Watch that was just sitting there resting on the person. So
that
one
is
of those
so
like
cool.
Amazing little stories. Yeah, exactly. But you said you knew the person, or
one of the neonatal nurses. She and I went to high school together, and I saw on Facebook the other day that she had posted about helping to deliver a baby. And yeah, we were friends in high school, and of course went off to different places. But I love that. You know, there were 3 neonatal nurses on the flight, and they were all able to come together to help, deliver this baby. And since then, I've had different people. Did you hear about what happened with Mimi? And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's so cool. So pretty nifty story there on its own. But I love that they thought quickly, hey, we don't have all of the equipment that we need. We'll warm up some bottles, and we'll, just take this Apple Watch to help measure the baby's heart rate. Very cool stuff. Excuse me. Let us move on to talk about Nanoleaf and its very interesting smart home remote that I find perplexing, but is quite well liked by some people. It's interesting that it's quite well liked by some people.
It's fascinating. It's like a giant Dungeons and Dragons what do you call it? Dice. There it is.
Yeah.
What's a single
It's a
dice?
dodecahedron.
There it is. Yeah.
And so it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are those? It's got pentagons all across it. But it's in, it's a dodecahedron. If you type in dodecahedron, you'll be able to look it up. And some of you might even just picture one in your head. But all of the different sides corresponds to different controls because it's got sensors inside to help you understand or to help it understand the gestures you make. So, for example, I could say that, the 6, the number 6 corresponds to this specific light. And then if I put the remote down so that the 6 is facing up, then it knows that I've selected the lights that are number 6, and then taking it and moving it to the left or rotating it to the right will actually affect the brightness of that light. And so you can do different things, including just turning off lights and also making adjustments to the brightness and contrast and things like that. So it's a really interesting thing. I just have always worried that it would give me issues where it would not work exactly how I wanted it to.
I just imagine if somehow you knocked it over and all the lights are just like, like it's like
yeah. You just get sick.
So it's fascinating. It's like it's a dial by when you set it down and rotate it, you can like twist the volume up and down or kind of or do the tap gesture. But it also works with HomeKit, which I thought was fascinating. I'm curious how well it works with HomeKit because I'm not exactly sure if that whole rotation system works. Like I just don't even my brain can't like process how that would pass us through HomeKit. But
yeah, it's my understanding that the rotational features are not a part of it. So it's kind of you can make it a hybrid device. So maybe with the Nanoleaf stuff that you have, you set those to 1 through 6 on on the dodecahedron's face. And when each of those is activated, you can use the dial. But then the rest of them, you actually connect to scenes within HomeKit. And the second that you take it and put it up top, then it activates that scene. So it becomes basically just a button at that point versus being an actual dial to control it.
Yeah, that's... wait, so is it an actual button, or is it just the second is faced up?
I don't know how long after it takes, but it's not something that you press. So it might be that, you put it down and then you give it a second and then it goes through. It says changing which side does what requires a few in-app taps, which is great because though there are color schemes I've grown attached to, I like changing the others up every few months. I was hoping that had more information about it. Up above they're talking about, it's got haptics at least, but yeah, this is a little weirder one that's why, especially that blend of having, it does sound nice. I think just the fact that it has 12 options means that you could just have, I don't have 12 uses for that kind of stuff. And so having half of it set to the lights and then the others just set to scenes makes sense. But that does make sense, is even if it is just purely activating it, that's the exact example of then you knock it over and suddenly scenes are going off. So, yeah. But it does seem like this is one of those that's almost too smart homey for it's the dial of the future and you can just rotate this dodecahedron and you'll be fine. That's something that would make my partner's eyes roll if I brought this in the house. What do I do with this? Well, Sebastian, you have to, and that's a no-go. It is just, at least it's not $60 or something like that. You put the side up. Yeah, I'm surprised at the price. It's only $30. But it is indeed just whatever side is up is the side that gets activated. So, that if you accidentally knock it over, it's going to change sides. I might have to get one though for my office. Yeah, it's worth trying. I think that's just a cool look what I can do also sort of thing. Yeah, it's just here's my smart home orb. Look what I can do. All right, let's talk about the fan that everybody keeps sending me. Does that happen? Yeah, I've got a lot of messages about this fan. The fan's okay, but I don't prefer to spend a bunch of money on a HomeKit-enabled fan when I can just install a fan switch for much less money and control the fan that I already have built into my ceilings. But Hunter has added a new HomeKit-enabled fan to its system, and they're just so pricey. I guess I don't know how much these ones are affordable. So it said $179, I guess, isn't bad. $180 isn't bad. That's why I was this is the only time it's ever been remotely in the realm that I would even think about it. Because, the article has a link to an iMore curation of the ceiling fans, and they're all in that price range. So that's why I do think this is starting to be the territory where I would consider it of I don't know. I just had assumed it was completely out of reason to get one of these just to be a smart thing, but that's pretty solid. $180 to, I don't know. I removed the article from doing this because I realized it was from last year, but I was just reading this other piece about ventilating your home and how just airflow is the biggest thing rather than trying to completely dehumidify the room. If you just never let any moisture particles sit, then it never should be an issue. So that immediately made me think of this ceiling fan actually sounds pretty nice. And I guess I only have heat, so maybe it's in my feature. Yeah, that makes sense. Walk into the room and I guess I would even have different scenes for turn off the fan while I'm recording and stuff like that. So it'd be pretty solid. And they have another slightly nicer version that is also $300. So this one might not be the best, but still worth considering now that they're that affordable. And then the last thing on the list here is that the 2022 Honda Civic, so a car for the rest of us, has wireless CarPlay built into it, and of course Android Auto as well. So if you've been looking to if you've been looking for a vehicle that has CarPlay, but you don't want to have to plug in every time, the next generation of the Honda Civic will have that wireless CarPlay technology built into it, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I like seeing that, like you said, come to just regular cars and not, what were we talking about, like Lamborghini features?
Oh my, yeah, the Lamborghini car, and then Rivian, and the Mustang Mach-E, all those fancy schmancy vehicles.
Wireless CarPlay is like, I'm like, oh, I totally want that. And then I'd be like, yeah, but I want to charge my phone while I'm driving. And so like, I would just plug it in also.
A lot of them have a built-in wireless charger for it. Yeah.
That would be cool. So. This is a random thing, but did you know that the AirPods can charge on the, what's the iPhone puck?
Really? The MagSafe puck?
Yeah. I just like randomly set mine down there, I think because I was like taking a shower and it's on my bedside table. And I was like, oh, they charge. Nice. Like,
what?
I didn't need a specific. Yeah, exactly. It's just a little mini Qi type thing. And I couldn't tell. I was like, do people know this or not? Like, I don't think it's common knowledge. Know that. But yeah.
Huh. I'm going to have to try that. Interesting. All righty, folks. That means it's time for our picks of the week next. Let's do our picks of the week. Up first, Matthew, what is your pick of the week?
This is the LunaDisplay, which is back in the news for an additional feature that they've to support their Mac-to-Mac mode, but it's the ability to do Ethernet and Thunderbolt support for target display mode in order to basically take one Mac and show it on the other without the wireless feedback issues that you might normally have. It does say that you can't pair two 5K iMacs. The second one has to be a lower resolution than the higher resolution computer, but it does seem like this could be a solid way to just have a dual display setup for an iMac if you wouldn't otherwise be able to. So I specifically have one of the older iMacs with is it DisplayPort that has not the USB-C Luna, but the old one. I have the old one for that computer. And I have a MacBook that I could use and set it up with the dual monitor display doing this and have it over Ethernet. So it's actually good quality, because that's one of the things that I've always tried to do this before, specifically for streaming, because I was trying to use the main screen, or like if I'm playing games, the monitor was set up just to be the game itself. And then I could have that second Mac be the secondary screen for that computer while also not adding to, I'm sure it'd still add to the resources, but less so than wirelessly. So that was the issue. It was always stuttering. So pretty solid. And the LunaDisplay itself is $99. So good way to get a secondary screen for your Mac if you don't have the like an iPad or one of the newer Macs that can do the, what's it called? Not AirPlay. Screen. Sidecar. There it is.
Yeah, nice, Kevin. Thank you. Sidecar. In honor of Thread, the pick this week that I have, it's available for $19.90 over at Maker Diary. And it is a little device that has built-in... it's got the Nordic semiconductor, which is something that Jonathan Hui mentioned earlier. It's got the Nordic semiconductor chip inside of it that supports Thread, Bluetooth LE, Wi-Fi, and a bunch of other protocols. And what you can do with this is you can you can use it to make a Thread border router so that you can kind of see how devices connect with it. So you set it up with like a Raspberry Pi and make your own border router. You can also create a network sniffer, which lets you see how Thread is communicating across your network. And then I can't remember what the third thing was. Open Thread border router, thread network sniffer, and then you can also use it to make a FIDO security key because of that NFC technology that's built into it. So if you are curious about if you are a bit more on the developer-y side and you're curious how Thread works, this is a great way to check out the kind of behind-the-scenes stuff involved with Thread. I got it because that's precisely what it was. I wanted to see kind of how things worked. So it's got Bluetooth 5, Bluetooth mesh, Thread, Wi-Fi, and other stuff on it. So yeah, you can use it.
iBeacon stuff too. It says that you can play with it. Maybe you could just check
Bluetooth 5, Bluetooth mesh, Thread, Zigbee, IEEE 802.15.4 ANT, and then 2.4 gigahertz communication stuff. Yeah. I don't know where you saw the iBeacon thing.
It's just down below. It's talking about the software resources on the getting started page. Or the product.
On the getting started page. Gotcha.
Sorry. But yeah. That's cool though. That's just like a little dongle to plug in and
to
do
basically
all that
make your own thread. To make your own thread router. So I have used, I haven't done a lot with it yet because I'm actually, since my Raspberry Pi is currently in use as my Homebridge system, I've ordered another Raspberry Pi so that I can play around with this and also just use it as my standard little development machine. So once that Raspberry Pi gets here, then I'll make use of this. But yeah, if you're wanting to kind of get an early look, as Jonathan Huey pointed out, the idea is that technology exists in the background, that the individual user doesn't even have to think about it. And so if you, like me, are kind of nosy and curious and you want to think about it and see it, then this is one of the ways that you can go about actually seeing it and using it. So really interesting little device that I discovered when I was reading about OpenThread, which is the open source protocol or open source version of the Thread protocol. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of another episode of Smart Tech Today. Thank you for tuning in today. We had such a great episode with Jonathan Huey, who is head of technology at the Thread Network and a VP over at Google. You can email us stt@twit.tv. And of course, you can tune in live by going to twit.tv/live every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. But the best way to get the show is by subscribing to it by going to twit.tv/STT. When you do that, you can subscribe to the show in audio and video formats across multiple different platforms. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. We're all the places you want to be. And you can definitely check us out there. It's the best way to get the show. And if you'd like to get the show sans ads, then there's a new way you can go about doing that. You can get all of our shows ad-free, not just Smart Tech Today, by checking out Club Twit, which is a $7 per month membership that gets you all the Twit shows with no ads, plus an exclusive Twit Plus bonus feed with extra content, and my favorite part, which is a members-only Discord server. You'll get access to the members-only Discord server where you'll be able to hang out with the hosts, and on some shows, you'll get brought up onto the stage to ask questions. It's really cool. We are having a lot of fun in Discord. So you can hop in there with all of the other folks who have become Club Twit members and hang out, have conversations, and share good stuff like Captain Jack did earlier today about the DIY smart mirror. So we're so thankful to those of you who have joined, and you just go to twit.tv/clubtwit to learn more about that. CLUBTWIT. $7 a month, and you get all that fun stuff. All right, Matthew Cassinelli, if folks want to follow you online and check out all the great work you're doing, where do they go to do that?
My website is matthewcassinelli.com, and I have a Siri shortcuts collection that you can check out. Yeah, and also Oliver has joined me for the outro of the show. It's chilling in my lap.
Matthew Cassinelli.
Oh my gosh, he's freaking out now. But then also you can follow me on YouTube at Matthew Cassinelli, and I have a cool AirTags and U1 prediction video coming out soon. So check that out. What about you?
I can be found at Mikah Sargent on as many social media networks as I can find, it seems. Or you can head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active. Thanks so much for tuning in to yet another episode of Smart Tech Today. We thank you. And we will say goodbye to our smart kitty assistants.
Say goodbye, Oliver. Oh.
Not having it.
Say bye, everybody. There he is.
Oh, there's a handsome kitty.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, and I want to tell you about my show, Hands on Photography, here on Twit TV. Each and every week, Thursday that is, I like to sit down and share with you the best tips and tricks that are going to help make you a better photographer. And it's not always about Photoshop. It's not always about just having the biggest and baddest and bestest camera. It can be the simplest of things, like leave your eye open when you're looking through the viewfinder. All of these simple tips can really help step your photography game up. So subscribe to the show today. That's twit.tv/hop. And I look forward to talking to you soon.